The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of the draconian imperial palace, its light refracting through the translucent walls to paint rainbow patterns on the polished obsidian floors. Emperor Zethkalar, whose scales shimmered like liquid emeralds in the dawn light, moved through his private chambers with the fluid grace that marked his ancient bloodline. At over 3,000 years old, he had ruled the Draconian Empire for nearly half his life, commanding respect and fear across 17 star systems. The empire stretched from the molten worlds of Pyros Prime to the ice-locked moons of Glacialis, encompassing hundreds of species that had either sworn fealty or been conquered by the dragon fleets. Each species served according to their strengths. The silicon-based crystallines managed the Empire's vast computational networks. The aquatic thalassans controlled interstellar shipping lanes, and the insectoid hive minds coordinated manufacturing across dozens of worlds. But it was the humans who puzzled him most. These strange, soft-skinned bipeds had arrived in his empire barely 2 centuries ago, refugees from some distant conflict, their primitive records barely documented. Unlike other conquered species, humans hadn't been subjugated through military might. They had simply appeared one day in ramshackle vessels, their leader, a weathered woman named Captain Sarah Chen, requesting asylum for her people. Zethkalar remembered that day clearly. The human delegation had stood in his throne room, their simple clothing contrasting sharply with the opulent surroundings. Where other species prostrated themselves or offered elaborate tributes, Captain Chen had simply looked him in the eye and said, "We ask for nothing but the chance to work and prove our worth." Something in her steady gaze had intrigued him. Perhaps it was their obvious vulnerability. Humans possessed no natural weapons, no armor, no telepathic abilities. They couldn't breathe methane like the Vorthak or survive in hard vacuum like the Ethereals. Yet they didn't beg or grovel. They simply endured. Over the decades, humans had carved out a unique niche in his empire. They became servants, yes, but also maintenance workers, cultural preservationists, and oddly enough, confidants to many noble families. There was something about their emotional intelligence that other species found comforting. They listened without judgment, worked without complaint, and somehow made themselves indispensable through sheer determination. Zethkalar had initially assigned them to minor roles, expecting them to fade into obscurity like so many other client species. Instead, they had quietly revolutionized palace operations. Human-maintained systems ran more efficiently. Human-organized schedules eliminated conflicts between different species' biological needs, and human-prepared meals somehow satisfied the diverse dietary requirements of his multicultural court. One human in particular had caught his attention over the past year. Lyra Morrison, a young woman who had been assigned as his personal attendant. Unlike the other species who served him, she wasn't genetically engineered for servitude or chemically conditioned for loyalty. She was simply present, efficient without being obsequious, respectful without being fearful. This morning, like every morning for the past 14 months, she would arrive precisely at the 7th bell to prepare his quarters for the day's activities. She would organize his schedule, ensure his ceremonial armor was properly maintained, and brief him on any cultural considerations for meetings with various species. Her briefings had prevented several diplomatic incidents that his other advisors had missed. The soft chime of the chamber's entry system announced her arrival. Zethkalar continued reviewing star charts at his desk, a habit that had developed over their months of working together. She would enter quietly, begin her duties, and they would exchange necessary information without the formal protocols that dominated his interactions with other species. "Good morning, Your Imperial Majesty," came her voice, steady as always but carrying a slight tremor he'd never noticed before. He looked up from his charts, and his ancient blood ran cold. Lyra stood by the door, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Her service uniform, normally pristine, was wrinkled and bore what looked like scorch marks along one sleeve. But it was her face that caused something primal to stir in his chest. A darkening bruise colored her left cheek, and she held her right arm at an awkward angle. "Who did this to you?" The words emerged as a low growl that made the crystal windows vibrate. Lyra's eyes widened slightly, and she automatically straightened into a more formal posture despite her obvious pain. "Your Majesty, I simply had an accident in the maintenance levels. Nothing of concern." Zethkalar rose to his full height, his 12-foot frame casting a shadow across the chamber. His scales had darkened to a deep forest green, a color change that any draconian would recognize as barely controlled fury. The temperature in the room began to rise as his internal fires responded to his emotional state. An accident that leaves scorch marks and impacts to suggest deliberate violence? His voice carried the harmonic undertones that could shatter stone when he was truly enraged. You will tell me the truth. For the first time since he'd known her, Lyra took a step backward. Not from fear of him, he realized, but from something else entirely. Shame, perhaps, or the kind of resignation he'd seen in prey animals that had given up hope of escape. Your Majesty, please. It's not your concern. I can handle this matter myself. Not my concern? The words came out as barely contained flames. You serve in my household. You are under my protection. Every being in this palace, from the lowest maintenance worker to my highest generals, exists under my authority and my protection. He moved closer, noting how she tried to hide the injured arm behind her back. His enhanced senses picked up traces of energy discharge on her clothing, the distinctive smell of plasma weapons set to pain rather than kill. Show me your arm. Your Majesty, I really must insist. Show me. The command carried the full weight of imperial authority, but underneath it was something else. Something that surprised him, genuine concern for her well-being. Reluctantly, Lyra extended her right arm. The sleeve fell back to reveal burn marks that formed a deliberate pattern. Someone had used a plasma torch to inscribe symbols into her skin. Zethkalar recognized them immediately. Vorthak pack markings. The Vorthak were one of his empire's more problematic client species. Predatory pack hunters who viewed non-predator species as natural prey. They required constant management to prevent them from hunting other imperial citizens. They were useful for certain military operations, but their integration into civilized society remained an ongoing challenge. The Vorthak did this. It wasn't a question. Lyra's silence was answer enough. How long has this been happening? Your Majesty, how long? The question emerged with enough force to crack the nearest crystal formation. 6 months, she whispered. But truly I can handle 6 months. Zethkalar turned away from her, moving to the great window that overlooked his capital city. Below, millions of beings from dozens of species went about their daily lives in the carefully maintained peace of his empire, a peace he had spent centuries building and protecting. 6 months of one of his people being tortured by pack hunters who thought they could prey on humans because humans couldn't fight back. 6 months of systematic abuse happening under his very nose in his own palace. The fury that built in his chest was unlike anything he'd experienced in centuries. It wasn't the hot rage of combat or the cold anger of political betrayal. This was something deeper, more fundamental. Someone had dared to harm one of his people. And worse, they had done so believing he was too weak or too indifferent to stop them. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. Zethkalar stood motionless at the window for several long minutes, his silence more terrifying than any roar. The temperature in the chamber continued to rise as his internal fires burned hotter, and Lyra could see heat shimmer, beginning to distort the air around his massive frame. When he finally spoke, his voice had taken on the deadly calm that his generals knew preceded absolute devastation. You will go to the medical wing immediately. Dr. Thessarian will tend to your injuries. He didn't turn from the window. You will tell him that these injuries are to be documented in full detail, including energy signature analysis of the burns. Your Majesty, please, if you take action against the Vorthak, they'll only make things worse for other humans. There will be no other humans suffering this fate. The words carried such finality that Lyra felt the truth of them in her bones. You will go to medical. That is not a request. Lyra hesitated, recognizing the futility of further argument. She bowed carefully, mindful of her injuries, and moved toward the door. As she reached the threshold, Zethkalar's voice stopped her. Lyra. For the first time, he used her name rather than a formal address. You are not alone in this. You never were. After she left, Zethkalar remained at the window until the heat radiating from his body began to crack the crystal. Only then did he move to his private communication console and activate the highest priority channel in the Imperial network. Admiral Kithara, report to my chambers immediately. Code Crimson. Code Crimson hadn't been used in over a century. It meant the Emperor required immediate military consultation for a matter that threatened the stability of the Empire itself. Within minutes, the chamber's main door announced an arrival. Admiral Kithara entered with the swift efficiency that had made her the youngest Draconian to achieve fleet command. Her deep blue scales marked her as coming from the Ice World bloodlines, and her reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her absolute loyalty to the throne. "Your Imperial Majesty." She performed the traditional wing-spread salute. "I came as soon as I received your summons. Kithara, in your assessment, how many humans currently serve throughout the Imperial Palace complex?" The question clearly puzzled her, but she answered promptly. "Approximately 3,000, Your Majesty." They constitute roughly 12% of the total palace staff across all divisions. And in your opinion, what is their value to Imperial operations? Now she looked genuinely confused. "Your Majesty, human staff efficiency ratings consistently exceed Imperial standards. They've reduced operational conflicts between species by 30% and improved overall productivity by 18% since their integration. Many department heads specifically request human assistance." "I see." Zethkalar turned from the window and Kithara immediately noticed the darkness of his scales and the heat distortion around him. "And if I were to tell you that members of the Vorthak contingent have been systematically torturing human staff for months, what would be your recommendation?" The temperature in the room wasn't the only thing that grew cold. Kithara's expression shifted to the lethal focus that had earned her command of the 3rd Battle Fleet. "Immediate arrest and tribunal, Your Majesty. Abuse of Imperial citizens is a capital offense regardless of species. And if the abuse has been ongoing for 6 months, with clear evidence of organized pack behavior rather than individual incidents, then we're dealing with a conspiracy that threatens the fundamental order of the Empire." Her voice carried the same deadly calm as his. "Such behavior cannot be tolerated under any circumstances." Zethkalar moved to his desk and activated a holographic display. "I want you to personally investigate every reported accident involving human staff over the past year. Cross-reference medical records, duty assignments, and Vorthak pack movements. I suspect we'll find a pattern that extends far beyond what we've discovered today." "Of course, Your Majesty." "Shall I coordinate with palace security?" "No." The word carried absolute finality. "This investigation will be conducted by military intelligence only. I want the results within 6 hours. Kithara's pupils dilated slightly, a draconian stress response. 6 hours was an impossibly short time frame for a thorough investigation, but questioning the Emperor's timeline would be unthinkable. "It will be done, Your Majesty. Furthermore, I want a complete tactical assessment of our current fleet positions. How quickly could we recall the 2nd and 4th fleets from the Outer Rim patrols?" This question made Kithara's concern evident. Recalling fleets from Border Patrol was the kind of decision that preceded major military action. The 2nd Fleet could return within 48 hours. The 4th would require 96 hours due to their current position near the Helix Nebula. "Make it happen. Highest priority. Your Majesty, if I may ask, are we facing an external threat?" Zethkalar studied her for a long moment. Kithara had served him faithfully for over 2 centuries. She had led his fleets to victory in 7 major campaigns, and had never questioned his orders even when they seemed impossible. But this situation was different. This wasn't about conquering new worlds or defending against invasion. This was about something more fundamental. "Admiral, what do you know about human military history?" The unexpected topic shift clearly confused her. "Very little, Your Majesty. Their records from before their arrival in our space are fragmentary. We know they were fleeing some kind of conflict, but they've never provided details. I've been studying their cultural archives in my spare time. Did you know that humans have a concept they call proportional response? I'm not familiar with the term. It means matching the level of retaliation to the level of the original offense. An eye for an eye, as they say." Zethkalar's smile revealed teeth that could shear through battle armor. "However, they also have another concept, escalation dominance, and which means when someone violates the basic rules of civilized behavior, you don't just match their level of violence. You exceed it by such a margin that they never even consider trying again. You make an example so memorable that others won't dare follow the same path." Understanding began to dawn in Kithara's eyes. "Your Majesty, surely the Vorthak situation doesn't require fleet action, doesn't it?" He activated another holographic display. this one showing the current positions of all Vorthak populations throughout the Empire. The Vorthak have 17 colony worlds, 43 asteroid mining stations, and 6 major fleet contingents. They number approximately 400 million individuals across the Empire. Yes, Your Majesty. And they apparently believe that humans are acceptable prey because humans cannot fight back effectively. His voice carried growing menace. They believe this because they've never seen what happens when someone truly powerful decides to fight back on humanity's behalf. Your Majesty, certainly a more focused response, would send the wrong message. Zethkalar moved to another console and began entering commands that made Kithara's scales pale. If word spreads that humans can be abused without consequence, how long before other species begin testing those boundaries? How long before the crystallines decide human emotional stability makes them useful as experimental subjects? How long before the hive minds begin using humans as living computer components? The questions hung in the air like poison. Kithara realized with growing horror that the Emperor wasn't just angry about the abuse itself. He was concerned about a cascade effect that could destabilize the entire social order of the Empire. I understand your concerns, Your Majesty, but do you? He turned to face her fully, and she stepped back involuntarily from the heat radiating from his body. Do you understand that the humans came to us with nothing, asking for nothing but the chance to work? Do you understand that they've given everything they have to make this empire function more efficiently? Do you understand that they've done all of this while being systematically hunted by predators who see them as easy targets? Kithara felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, genuine fear. Not of external enemies or impossible odds, but of her own emperor in the grip of a fury that threatened to reshape the very foundations of their civilization. And do you understand, Zethkalar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, that if I allow this to continue, I will have failed in the most basic duty of a ruler, protecting those who cannot protect themselves? The silence that followed was broken only by the subtle hum of the palace's environmental systems struggling to compensate for the heat radiating from the Emperor's body. Finally, Kithara spoke. What are your orders, Your Majesty? Begin fleet recall immediately. In 6 hours, when you present your investigation results, I want options. I want to know every Vorthak who participated in this abuse, everyone who knew about it and did nothing, and everyone in a position of authority who could have prevented it. And then? Zethkalar's smile was the most terrifying thing Kithara had ever seen. Then we teach the galaxy what happens when someone hurts my people. 6 hours later, Admiral Kithara stood before the Emperor's private war room, her expression grim. The investigation had revealed horrors that made even her battle-hardened mind recoil. The door slid open with a whispered command, revealing Zethkalar studying a 3-dimensional tactical display that showed every Vorthak position throughout the Empire. Report, he commanded without looking up. Your Majesty, the situation is far worse than we initially believed. Kithara activated her own holographic projector, filling the air with medical records, incident reports, and surveillance data. Over the past 18 months, we've documented 237 accidents involving human staff. Energy signature analysis confirms Vorthak weapons were used in 80% of cases. Zethkalar's scales darkened further, but he remained silent. The pattern suggests organized hunting behavior. Vorthak packs have been selecting humans based on isolation opportunities. Night shift workers, maintenance staff in remote sections, individuals with minimal contact with other species. They've been particularly targeting humans who work alone or in small groups. Casualties? 17 confirmed deaths disguised as equipment failures or accidents in hazardous areas. Over 100 cases of deliberate injury requiring medical treatment. The remainder involve psychological trauma, from what can only be described as sport hunting. The temperature in the room spiked dangerously. Several of the holographic projectors began displaying error warnings as their components struggled with the heat. Who knew? The question emerged as barely controlled flame. That's where it gets complicated, Your Majesty. Evidence suggests this began as the initiative of a single pack, led by Vorthak pack leader Gakmor. However, the behavior spread to at least 12 other packs across 4 different worlds. More disturbing, several instances of higher-ranking Vorthak deliberately reassigning human staff to facilitate hunting opportunities. You're telling me this became institutionalized behavior? Yes, Your Majesty. What started as criminal activity by one pack evolved into what amounts to an organized system of predation, with tacit approval from Vorthak leadership. Zethkalar finally looked up from his display, and Kithara had to consciously prevent herself from stepping backward. His eyes had taken on the molten gold color that indicated his internal fires were approaching their maximum safe levels. Where is Gokmore now? Palace security reports indicate he's currently in the residential sector, along with most of his pack. They appear to be unaware that their activities have been discovered. Good. Zethkalar moved to a different console, his claws clicking against the crystalline surface as he input commands. What's the status of fleet recall? The second fleet achieved orbital position 40 minutes ago. The fourth fleet will arrive within 18 hours. Your Majesty, Admiral Thysic is requesting clarification on deployment parameters. Tell Admiral Thysic to prepare for Operation Sword of Damocles. Kithara's blood chilled. Operation Sword of Damocles was a theoretical military doctrine that had never been implemented. The complete annihilation of a client species for crimes against the Empire. It was considered so extreme that it existed only in classified strategic planning documents. Your Majesty, surely you don't intend... I intend to send a message that will resonate throughout the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. He turned from the console, and Kithara could see the heat distortion around his body intensifying. But first I'm going to have a conversation with Gokmore. Your Majesty, if you confront him directly, you're concerned he might try to harm me? The question carried genuine amusement. Admiral, I am a 3,000-year-old dragon whose breath can melt battle armor. Gokmore is a pack hunter whose species measures success by hunting prey that cannot fight back. Before Kithara could respond, Zethkalar activated the palace communication system. Palace security, this is the Emperor. Locate Vorthak pack leader Gokmore and escort him to Throne Room 7 immediately. He is not under arrest yet. The pause before the security officer's response suggested confusion. Your Imperial Majesty, should we inform pack leader Gokmore of the nature of this audience?
Tell him the Emperor wishes to discuss human staff assignments.
Nothing more. 20 minutes later, Gokmore swaggered into Throne Room 7 with the confidence of a predator who had never faced anything capable of fighting back. The Vorthak stood nearly 7 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. His species resembled a hybrid between a mantis and a wolf, with razor-sharp appendages and sensory organs optimized for hunting. Your Imperial Majesty honors me with this audience, Gokmore said, performing a perfunctory bow that barely qualified as respectful. Zethkalar sat upon a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian, his form deliberately positioned to catch the chamber's lighting in the most intimidating manner possible. Gokmore, I understand you've taken a particular interest in human staff efficiency. Indeed, Your Majesty. Humans are fascinating creatures, so fragile, so vulnerable. It's amazing they've survived as long as they have. The Vorthak's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. Fragile, yes. Tell me, what happens when something fragile is placed under too much stress? It breaks naturally. Gokmore's confidence remained absolute. But humans are remarkably resilient. They can endure quite a lot of pressure before they break completely. You speak as if from experience. Observation only, Your Majesty. One learns much about a species by watching how they respond to adversity. Zethkalar rose from his throne, the movement slow and deliberate. And what have you learned about humans through your observations? Their prey, Your Majesty. Nothing more. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no psychic abilities. They survive through hiding and running. When confronted by a true predator, they can only submit or die. Interesting hypothesis. Zethkalar began to circle Gokmore, each step calculated to demonstrate the difference in their sizes. Tell me, have you tested this hypothesis personally? For the first time, Gokmore showed a flicker of uncertainty. I'm not sure I understand the question, Your Majesty. It's quite simple. Have you personally subjected humans to stress to observe their breaking points? The chamber fell silent except for the soft whisper of Zethkalar's claws against the stone floor. Gokmore's sensory organs twitched as they detected the rising temperature in the room. Your Majesty, I would never presume to interfere with palace staff without proper authorization. Interesting, because I have medical records suggesting otherwise. Zethkalar's voice remained conversational, but heat shimmer began distorting the air around him. Records showing energy burns consistent with Vorthak weapons. Records documenting systematic torture over a period of months. Gakmor's exoskeleton darkened, a stress response indicating recognition of a superior predator. Your Majesty, if some of my pack have been overzealous in their duties— Overzealous? The word emerged as flame. You call the systematic torture and murder of Imperial citizens overzealous? The temperature spike was immediate and intense. Gakmor's exoskeleton began to smoke as the chamber's atmosphere heated beyond normal tolerance levels for most species. Your Majesty, please understand humans are not true citizens, they're servants. Prey animals that— Gakmor never finished the sentence. Zethkalar moved with the terrifying speed that had made dragons the apex predators of their homeworld for millions of years. One moment he was 20 feet away. The next, his claws were wrapped around Gakmor's throat, lifting the 7-foot Vorthak off the ground as if he weighed nothing. You are absolutely correct about one thing, Zethkalar said, his voice deadly calm despite the flames flickering between his teeth. Humans cannot protect themselves from predators like you. They are fragile, vulnerable, and completely dependent on others for protection. Gakmor's appendages scrabbled uselessly at the claws holding him, his strength meaningless against the Emperor's grip. But you made one critical error in your assessment. Zethkalar's eyes blazed with molten gold. You assumed that because humans cannot protect themselves, no one else would protect them either. The heat in the chamber continued to rise. Gakmor's exoskeleton began to crack under the thermal stress. You forgot that humans work under my protection. You forgot that every being in this empire exists under my authority and my guardianship. You forgot that when you hurt one of my people, you challenge me directly. Gakmor managed to rasp out a few words. Your Majesty, mercy, mercy? Zethkalar's smile revealed teeth that glowed like coals. You want mercy? Did you show mercy to the humans you tortured? Did you show mercy to the 17 you murdered? Did you show mercy when they begged you to stop? The Vorthak's struggles were weakening as the heat continued to damage his respiratory system. I am going to show you exactly the same mercy you showed them. Zethkalar's grip tightened.
None whatsoever. The sound that filled Throne Room 7 wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite the cracking of an exoskeleton under extreme pressure.
It was something far worse, the sound of a predator finally understanding what it felt like to be prey. The Imperial communication array hummed with unprecedented activity as news of Operation Sword of Damocles rippled across the galaxy. Within hours, every major species in the Empire was demanding clarification, explanation, or audience with the Emperor. Trade routes slowed as merchant vessels waited for confirmation that interstellar law still functioned. Military commanders from 17 different species requested emergency protocols, but it was the humans who reacted most dramatically. Captain Sarah Chen, now serving as the unofficial human representative despite having no formal title, stood in the Emperor's receiving chamber with 12 other senior human staff members. Her weathered face showed the same determination that had impressed Zethkalar 2 centuries ago, but now it was mixed with something approaching panic. Your Imperial Majesty, she began, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. We've come to request that you reconsider this course of action. Zethkalar regarded the small group of humans assembled before his throne. These people had served his empire faithfully for decades, asking for nothing beyond basic protection and the right to work. Now they stood before him, trembling not with fear for themselves but with concern for their oppressors. You wish me to show mercy to the Vorthak? Yes, Your Majesty. We understand you're acting to protect us and we're grateful beyond words for your concern. But this isn't who we are. We don't want to be the cause of genocide. Admiral Kithara, standing at her position beside the throne, watched this exchange with fascination. In all her centuries of service, she had never seen a client species argue for the preservation of those who had systematically abused them. Captain Chen, Zethkalar said carefully, are you aware of the full scope of Vorthak crimes against your people? We are, Your Majesty. The medical staff briefed us completely. Her voice wavered slightly. 17 deaths. Over 100 injured. Hundreds more terrorized. And yet you stand here asking me to spare their species. Because that's what humans do. Another voice spoke. Dr. James Okafor, who ran the palace's cross-species medical coordination program. Your Majesty, you've studied our cultural archives. You know about our concepts of proportional response and escalation dominance, but there's another human concept you may not have encountered: transformative justice. Explain. Dr. Okafor stepped forward slightly, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. Transformative justice is the idea that true resolution of conflict comes not from punishment, but from changing the systems that allowed the conflict to occur in the first place. The system that allowed this to occur is the existence of predator species in my empire. No, Your Majesty. Captain Chen's voice carried a note of respectful disagreement that made Kithara tense. The system that allowed this is the assumption that some species are naturally prey and others are naturally predators, and that this relationship is immutable. Seth Kalar leaned forward slightly, genuinely curious despite his fury. You believe the Vorthak can be changed? We believe any intelligent species can choose to change, given the right motivation and support structure. This from Dr. Elena Vasquez, who coordinated human assignments throughout the palace. Your Majesty, humans have been studying Vorthak behavior for years. They're not mindless predators. They're intelligent beings whose cultural development was shaped by environmental pressures that no longer exist. Their environment shaped them to be hunters. How do you propose to reshape an entire species? Captain Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. By giving them something worth protecting instead of something to hunt. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kithara found herself holding her breath, waiting to see how the Emperor would respond to this unprecedented suggestion. Continue. Vorthak pack behavior evolved because their homeworld required coordinated hunting to survive. But they've been in your empire for 3 centuries now. They have abundant food, safe territories, and no natural predators. The hunting behavior persists because it's the only cultural framework they understand for establishing social hierarchy and personal worth. Dr. Okafor picked up the explanation. What if we offered them an alternative framework? Something that used their natural coordination abilities and pack loyalty, but directed it toward protection instead of predation? You're suggesting the Vorthak become protectors rather than hunters. Not just protectors, Your Majesty. Guardians. Specifically, guardians of the most vulnerable members of Imperial society. Captain Chen's voice gained strength as she outlined the proposal. Humans, yes, but also the elderly of all species. Children, the disabled, anyone who needs protection rather than domination. Seth Kalar sat back in his throne, his expression unreadable. You want me to entrust human safety to the very species that has been systematically abusing you? Not immediately, and not without extensive preparation and oversight, Dr. Vasquez said quickly. But yes, eventually. Your Majesty, transformation requires trust. It requires giving someone the opportunity to become something better than they were. And if they fail, if they betray that trust and continue their hunting behavior, Captain Chen met his gaze directly. Then you implement Operation Sword of Damocles. But give them the chance to choose a different path first. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of environmental systems. Kithara watched her emperor wrestle with concepts that clearly challenged his fundamental understanding of justice and governance. Finally, Seth Kalar spoke. You realize that what you're proposing is far more complex and resource-intensive than simply eliminating the threat? Yes, Your Majesty. You realize that it requires me to trust species that have already proven themselves untrustworthy? Yes, Your Majesty. You realize that if this fails, if even one Vorthak reverts to predatory behavior under this new system, the consequences could be catastrophic? Yes, Your Majesty. We understand all of that. Captain Chen's voice remained steady. But we also understand that the alternative, genocide, makes us no better than they are. Seth Kalar rose from his throne and moved to the great window overlooking his capital. Below, millions of beings from dozens of species lived and worked together in the careful balance he had spent centuries creating, a balance that had been threatened not by external enemies or natural disasters, but by the failure to address fundamental inequalities within his own system. Admiral Kithara. Yes, Your Majesty. Suspend Operation Sword of Damocles. Instead, implement Operation Second Chance. Your Majesty, there is no Operation Second Chance in our military doctrine. There is now. He turned back to face the assembled humans. Captain Chen, you and your people will design this transformative justice program. You have unlimited resources and full Imperial authority to implement whatever measures you deem necessary. Your Majesty. However, his voice took on the deadly calm that preceded Imperial edicts. You will also bear full responsibility for its success or failure. If a single Vorthak under this program harms any Imperial citizen, the consequences will fall on the human community, as well as the Vorthak. The weight of that responsibility settled over the assembled humans. Like a physical presence, they were being offered the chance to save their oppressors, but at the cost of their own safety and potentially their own survival. Captain Chen straightened her shoulders. We accept those terms, Your Majesty. Furthermore, this program will serve as a test case for Imperial justice reform. If successful with the Vorthak, it will be expanded to address conflicts between all client species. You're not just trying to save the Vorthak. You're trying to fundamentally change how justice works in my empire. Dr. Okafor swallowed hard. We understand, Your Majesty. I hope you do. Zethkalar returned to his throne, his expression softening slightly. Because if you succeed, you'll have accomplished something that 3,000 years of traditional imperial governance could not. True peace between natural enemies. And if we fail? If you fail, then Operation Sword of Damocles will be the merciful option compared to what comes next. As the humans filed out of the chamber, Admiral Kithara remained behind. Your Majesty, are you certain this is wise? Entrusting Vorthak reform to the very species they've victimized? Kithara, in all my centuries of rule, I've never encountered a species that responds to oppression with a desire to reform their oppressors rather than destroy them. Either humans are the most foolishly naive species in the galaxy, or they understand something about the nature of civilization that the rest of us have missed. And which do you believe? Zethkalar smiled, the expression carrying both hope and apprehension. I suppose we're about to find out. The next morning, a new Imperial edict was broadcast across all 17 star systems. By order of His Imperial Majesty, all Vorthak citizens are hereby conscripted into the Imperial Guardian Corps, a new military branch dedicated to the protection of vulnerable populations. Training begins immediately under human supervision. Participation is mandatory. Success is not optional. And with those words, the most ambitious social engineering project in galactic history began. 3 months into Operation Second Chance, the Cerberus training facility on the moon of Valdris had become the most watched military installation in the Empire. What had begun as a desperate gamble by a handful of humans had evolved into something unprecedented. The systematic transformation of an entire predator species. Captain Chen stood in the observation deck overlooking Training Ground Alpha, watching something that should have been impossible. Below, a Vorthak pack led by former hunt leader Skatar was conducting a rescue simulation. Their objective: extract a group of elderly crystalline citizens from a collapsed mining facility while protecting them from environmental hazards. 6 months ago, Eskatar would have seen those same crystallines as prey to be hunted for sport. Today, he was coordinating his pack's efforts to ensure not one of the fragile silicon-based beings suffered so much as a crack in their crystalline matrices. Progress report, Emperor Zethkalar said, materializing beside her with the silent movement that still startled everyone who worked with him. Better than we dared hope. Your Majesty. Chen activated a holographic display showing training statistics. We've processed 437 Vorthak through the basic Guardian protocols. Recidivism rate is currently at 0.3%, meaning only one Vorthak has reverted to predatory behavior since training began. And that individual was reported to us by his own packmates before he could cause harm. Zethkalar studied the data with the analytical mind that had built an empire. That's remarkably low. I expected at least 10% failure rate. So did we. Chen pulled up another display showing psychological evaluation results, but we underestimated how much Vorthak pack mentality would work in our favor. Once the pack leaders committed to the Guardian Protocol, pack loyalty ensured that subordinate members followed suit. They watched as Eskatar's pack successfully extracted the last crystalline from the simulated collapse. The Vorthak handled their charges with a gentleness that seemed impossible, given their natural weaponry. Each movement was carefully calculated to avoid harm. Each communication was designed to reduce rather than increase stress in their protected charges. What's the secret? Zethkalar asked. How did you achieve this level of behavioral modification so quickly? We didn't modify their behavior, Your Majesty. We redirected it. Dr. Okafor's voice came from behind them as he joined the observation session. Vorthak psychology is built around pack hunting, but the core drive isn't violence. It's the protection and advancement of the pack through coordinated action. Explain. Traditional Vorthak hunting behavior involves identifying vulnerable prey, coordinating pack movements to isolate the target, and then eliminating the threat to pack security that the prey represents. The violence is a means to an end, not the end itself. Chen picked up the explanation. So we kept the coordination requirements but changed the objective. Instead of eliminating threats to pack security, they eliminate threats to the security of those under their protection. You turned their hunting instincts into protective instincts. Exactly, and the results have been remarkable. Vorthak packs assigned to protect retirement communities report higher satisfaction ratings than any other security service. Vorthak guardians working with disabled individuals show stress responses when their charges experience any discomfort. On the training ground below, Escatar was now conducting a debrief with his pack. Even without audio, the body language was unmistakable. These were successful hunters celebrating a successful hunt. The fact that success was now measured in lives protected rather than lives taken seemed to make no difference to their fundamental psychology. There's something else, Your Majesty, Dr. Okafor said quietly. Something we didn't anticipate. Continue. The Vorthak aren't just adapting to guardian roles, they're innovating within them. They're developing new protection techniques that surpass anything our military advisors designed. Pack leader Greshka's unit has invented 17 new emergency response protocols that we're now teaching to other species. Zethkalar's eyebrows rose slightly. They're improving upon our methods? Dramatically. Their natural pack coordination abilities, combined with their predator-level tactical thinking, makes them extraordinarily effective at threat assessment and response. They can identify and neutralize dangers that other species might miss entirely. Show me. Chen activated a different display, this one showing recent field reports. Last week, a pack guarding a Thalassan nursery school identified what they termed a wrong sound pattern in the building's environmental systems. Investigation revealed a microscopic leak in the atmospheric recyclers that would have proven fatal to Thalassan larvae within hours. No other species has sensory capabilities sufficient to detect such subtle changes. They're better at protection than we are. In many ways, yes. They're certainly more dedicated. Vorthak guardians work 18-hour shifts as standard practice and consider it insufficient. They've requested permission to implement 24-hour rotating watch schedules for all high-priority protection assignments. Zethkalar was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. An entire species that had been destined for extinction was not only proving reformable but was actively becoming more valuable to the Empire than they had ever been as hunter-predators. What about the humans who were originally victimized? How are they responding to this development? That's the most remarkable part, Your Majesty. Chen's voice carried a note of pride mixed with amazement. 23 human staff members have volunteered to work directly with Vorthak Guardian units, including Lyra. My personal attendant requested assignment to work with Vorthak. She specifically requested assignment to Skatar's pack. She said, and I quote, "If we're going to prove this works, we need to prove it works with the worst cases first." And Sekatar was involved in the original abuse. He was Gakmor's second in command, responsible for at least 12 documented attacks on human staff. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. Your Majesty, yesterday I watched Lyra explain human emotional responses to Siskatar's pack so they could better protect human civilians. He listened to every word with the same intensity he once focused on hunting her. That seems psychologically problematic for both parties. We thought so too, but Lyra insisted, and Dr. Vasquez's psychological evaluations show no indication of trauma response or manipulation. If anything, both Lyra and Siskatar show improved stress indicators when working together. How is that possible? Dr. Okafor stepped forward. Your Majesty, we're discovering that the transformation process is therapeutic for both species involved. The Vorthak gain a sense of purpose and pack value that their traditional hunting behavior never provided. The humans gain a sense of agency and empowerment that comes from turning victimization into voluntary cooperation. Zethkalar processed this information while watching the training exercise below conclude. Escatar's pack was now interacting with the crystalline victims they had rescued, receiving feedback on their performance and suggestions for improvement. The scene looked like any other military training debrief, except that the soldiers were former predators and their instructors were former prey. Admiral Kithara reports that other species are requesting similar guardian services, he said finally. Yes, Your Majesty. The Ethereals want Vorthak protection for their deep space research stations. The hive minds have requested guardian packs for their queen nurseries. Even the crystallines are asking for Vorthak security for their computational cores. And we have sufficient reformed Vorthak to meet this demand? Not yet, but we're expanding the program. Phase 2 begins next month. We'll be processing the remaining 60% of the Vorthak population through guardian training. At current success rates, we should have a fully transformed species within 18 months. Phase 3? Chen and Dr. Okafor exchange glances. Phase 3 extends the transformative justice model to other interspecies conflicts throughout the Empire. The Ethereals and Thalassans have requested mediation for their territorial disputes. The silicon miners and the methane breathers want assistance resolving their resource allocation conflicts. You want to become the Imperial Conflict Resolution Service. We want to prove that transformation is more effective than punishment for creating lasting peace. Chen's voice carried quiet conviction. Your Majesty, in 3 months we've turned the Empire's most dangerous predator species into its most effective protectors. Imagine what we could accomplish with species whose conflicts are based on misunderstanding rather than predation. Zethkalar looked out over the training ground one more time. Below, Vorthak and crystallines were working together to repair the simulated damage from the rescue exercise, former hunters and former prey cooperating as colleagues and friends. Very well. You have authorization for Phase 3 expansion, but the same conditions apply. Success is mandatory, failure is catastrophic. Understood, Your Majesty. As Chen and Dr. Okafor departed to implement the next stage of their ambitious program, Zethkalar remained at the observation window. For the first time in centuries, he was witnessing something genuinely new in his empire, the transformation of the fundamental nature of civilization itself. 1 year after the implementation of Operation Second Chance, the Imperial Palace hosted the most unusual celebration in its 3,000-year history. The Great Hall, traditionally reserved for military victories and territorial conquests, now hosted the first annual Transformation Day, a celebration of successful species integration and conflict resolution. Emperor Zethkalar stood on the dais overlooking a scene that would have been impossible just 12 months earlier. Vorthak guardians moved through the crowd, not as predators or even as reformed predators, but as respected members of imperial society. Children from a dozen different species approached them without fear, seeking protection, guidance, or simply conversation. At the center of the hall, a remarkable presentation was taking place. Lyra Morrison, no longer his personal attendant but now director of interspecies harmony, was addressing the assembled representatives of 17 different species. Beside her stood Seskatar, his chitinous frame decorated with the golden emblems of the Imperial Guardian Corps. The transformation model has exceeded all projections, Lyra was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. Guardian Corps efficiency ratings are 40% higher than traditional Imperial security forces. More importantly, citizen satisfaction ratings for areas under Guardian protection are at historic highs. Ambassador Thyssen of the Crystalline Confederation, his silicon-based form refracting the hall's lights into rainbow patterns, stepped forward to address the assembly. The crystalline worlds wish to formally commend the Guardian Corps for their exceptional service. Last month, Guardian Pack Zeta-7 prevented what could have been a catastrophic resonance cascade in our primary computational matrix. Their rapid response and innovative protection protocols saved not just individual lives, but the collective memory of our entire civilization. Appreciative harmonic tones arose from the crystalline delegation. Zethkalar watched Eskatar's reaction carefully. The former pack hunter's posture showed genuine pride in protection rather than conquest, a psychological transformation that still amazed the Emperor. More than that, continued Ambassador Thyssen, the Guardians have become cultural bridges between species. Pack leader Esiskitar has spent the past 6 months learning crystalline harmonic communication. He can now conduct protection briefings in our native frequency patterns. This was news to Zethkalar. He made a mental note to review the Guardian training curricula. Apparently the Vorthak were adapting beyond even the humans' expectations. Admiral Kithara approached the dais, her expression carrying the mix of professional satisfaction and personal amazement that had become common among Imperial military leadership. Your Majesty, I have the quarterly reports from all 17 star systems. Summarize. Interspecies conflicts requiring military intervention are down 78% from pre-transformation levels. Requests for Guardian Corps services now exceed our ability to provide them by a factor of 4 to 1. And, she paused, as if still struggling to believe her own words, we're receiving applications from other empires requesting consultation on similar transformation programs. Other empires want our expertise? The hegemony of scales has formally requested human advisors to address their ongoing conflict with the Swarm Collective. The Democratic Federation is asking for Vorthak Guardian trainers to help reform their prison systems. Even the Neutral Zone Commerce Guild wants to implement our mediation protocols. Zethkalar absorbed this information while watching the celebration below. Near the great windows, a group of Thalassan youngsters were playing what appeared to be a hunting game with several young Vorthak. But the game had been transformed. Instead of hunters and prey, it was protectors and those seeking safety. The Vorthak hunters succeeded when they successfully guided the Thalassan refugees to safety zones, while the young Thalassans won points for creative challenges that tested the Vorthak's protective abilities. Admiral, what's our current military readiness status? Paradoxically, it's higher than ever. The Guardian Corps has freed our traditional military forces from internal security duties, allowing them to focus entirely on external threats. The Corps' threat assessment capabilities have also prevented 17 potential terrorist incidents and 3 attempted invasions before they could develop into military situations, and they're making our military more effective by handling problems before they become military problems. Exactly. And there's something else, Your Majesty. The transformation program has generated unprecedented loyalty among client species. Voluntary compliance with imperial directives is at historic highs. Tax collection rates have improved. Even rebellion activities in the Outer Rim territories have decreased significantly, because species that feel protected rather than oppressed are less likely to revolt. That appears to be the case. Yes. A commotion near the hall's main entrance drew their attention. Captain Chen was escorting a new group of arrivals, representatives from the previously unknown Shade Collective, a species that had only recently made contact with the Empire. The Shades were energy beings, appearing as roughly humanoid outlines of shifting darkness with glowing points of light for eyes. Your Majesty, Chen announced as the group approached the dais, may I present Umbral Speaker Nethos of the Shade Collective. They've traveled from the Outer Dark specifically to learn about our transformation protocols. Umbral Speaker Nethos moved forward, its form shifting and coalescing as it approached. When it spoke, its voice sounded like whispers from all directions at once. Great Dragon Emperor, the Shade Collective has observed your empire's transformation with great interest. We face a similar challenge with our own problematic species, explain. The Devourers, energy parasites that feed on the life force of other beings. They have plagued our region of space for millennia, always taking, always consuming, never giving anything in return. We have tried extinction. We have tried containment. Neither has succeeded. Zethkalar leaned forward with interest. The Devourers were known even in his space, energy vampires that could drain the life from entire planets if left unchecked. You wish to apply transformation protocols to beings whose very nature is parasitic consumption? We wish to learn if transformation is possible where all other methods have failed. The Shade's voice carried desperate hope. Your humans achieved something we believed impossible. They changed the fundamental nature of a predator species without destroying what made them valuable. Captain Chen stepped forward. Your Majesty, the theoretical framework could apply to parasitic species as well as predatory ones. Instead of redirecting hunting instincts toward protection, we would need to redirect consumption instincts toward generation or restoration. Turn energy parasites into energy producers? Or energy healers, Dr. Okafor interjected, joining the conversation with characteristic enthusiasm. Beings that naturally understand energy consumption could potentially become exceptionally skilled at energy restoration. They might become the galaxy's most effective medical specialists. Umbral speaker Nithos's form brightened noticeably. This concept, it has potential. The Devourers understand energy manipulation better than any species we know. If their consumption drive could be redirected toward healing rather than harming, it would solve both your Devourer problem and create a medical resource beyond anything currently available. Zethkalar concluded. Interesting. Captain Chen, what would such a program require? Significant expansion of our current facilities and training protocols. We'd need to develop entirely new psychological frameworks for beings whose existence is based on consumption rather than cooperation. It would be our most challenging project yet. But possible? Chen exchanged glances with her team. Possible, yes. Guaranteed, no. The failure risks would be enormous. A Devourer reverting to type could kill thousands before being stopped. But the success rewards would be proportionally enormous as well. Zethkalar stood, his decision made. Very well. Operation Second Chance is hereby expanded to include the transformation of parasitic species. Umbral speaker Nithos, your people may establish a diplomatic mission here to coordinate this effort. The Shade's form pulsed with excited energy. The collective will remember this generosity for all the ages to come, Great Dragon Emperor. As the celebration continued around them, Admiral Kithara spoke quietly to the Emperor. Your Majesty, we're essentially becoming the galaxy's transformation service. We'll be dealing with every problematic species that other empires can't handle. Yes, Zethkalar agreed, watching as Lyra demonstrated conflict resolution techniques to a mixed group of species representatives. And in the process, we're building something unprecedented, a truly stable multi-species civilization based on transformation rather than domination. The implications are staggering. If we can prove that any species can be reformed rather than destroyed, it could change the fundamental nature of how empires work. It already has, Admiral. The question now is whether we can scale this transformation to the entire galaxy. Below them, the celebration continued. Former predators protected former prey. Former enemies worked as colleagues. Former concepts of impossible had become routine reality. 5 years had passed since Lyra Morrison first entered the Emperor's chambers with bruises that changed the galaxy. Now she stood in the newly constructed Transformation Institute on Harmony Station, the massive space station that had become the center of intergalactic species integration efforts. The station orbited no planet, belonging to no single empire, serving as neutral ground where the impossible had become routine. Representatives from 47 different galactic civilizations worked together in halls that once would have been battlefields. The Institute had become so successful that species were requesting transformation services, not because they had problematic populations, but because transformation made their societies more efficient, more peaceful, and more prosperous. Emperor Zethkalar walked beside Lyra through the Institute's main corridor, observing the organized chaos of a dozen ongoing transformation programs. In Medical Wing Alpha, former Devourers worked alongside Shade Collective healers to develop new life restoration techniques. In Training Complex 7, Vorthak instructors taught protection protocols to the former warrior caste of the stellar hegemony. In Research Lab 12, human psychologists collaborated with AI entities to develop transformation frameworks for silicon-based hive minds. Status report on the Devourer program? Zethkalar asked, as they paused to observe a remarkable scene through an observation window. 97% success rate, Lyra replied, consulting a holographic display. The 3% failure rate is actually lower than our baseline expectations. More importantly, the transformed Devourers have revolutionized energy medicine across 17 civilizations. Through the window, they watched a being that had once been among the galaxy's most feared parasites. Healer Vexithera, formerly a high-ranking Devourer lord who had consumed the life force of entire cities, now worked with delicate precision to restore the failing energy matrix of a dying crystalline. The same abilities that had once made it a planet killer now made it capable of healing injuries that no other form of medicine could address. Healer Vexithera alone has saved over 10,000 lives in the past year, Lyra continued. The former Devourer Collective has requested assignment to the Galactic Plague Response Team. They want to fight diseases instead of causing them. More than that, They want to develop immunity enhancement techniques that could prevent plagues entirely. Their understanding of energy consumption makes them uniquely qualified to strengthen life force against parasitic infections. They continued walking, passing the memorial wall, a crystalline structure that honored the 17 humans who had died during the original Vorthak predation, as well as the thousands of beings who had died in interspecies conflicts before transformation became an option. The wall served as a reminder of why their work mattered. "What about the new challenges?" Zethkalar asked. "The Hive Queen integration project begins next month. That'll be our most complex undertaking yet, transforming the relationship between hive mind controllers and their worker populations from domination to genuine cooperation." "And the temporal collective's request?" Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "That's complicated. They're asking us to develop transformation protocols for beings who exist partially outside normal time streams. The psychological frameworks for species that experience past, present, and future simultaneously are beyond anything we've attempted, but not beyond what you'll attempt. Not beyond what we'll try." Her smile carried the same determination that had convinced an emperor to spare a species rather than destroy it. "Dr. Okafor thinks it's possible. Captain Chen is designing preliminary approaches, and the Temporal Collective has agreed to provide full historical access to study successful and failed transformation attempts across multiple timelines." They reached the Institute's central hub, a vast spherical chamber where representatives from dozens of species worked together on coordination protocols. At the chamber's center, a holographic display showed the current status of transformation efforts across known space. Green indicators marked successful programs, over 200 distinct species integration projects, with success rates averaging above 90%. Yellow indicators showed programs in development, including several that would have been considered impossible just years earlier. Red indicators marked failures, a sobering reminder that transformation was not always achievable. "The failure rate is still too high for my comfort," Zethkalar observed, noting 17 red indicators scattered across the galactic map. "It's lower than the death rate from traditional conflict resolution," Lyra pointed out. "But yes, every failure represents lives lost and opportunities missed. We're developing new approaches for the most difficult cases, such as the Void Callers, species whose cultural identity is based on ending existence rather than preserving it. Traditional transformation assumes the subject wants to be part of civilization. The Void Callers want to return everything to primordial nothingness. That does seem problematic for transformation therapy. Dr. Vasquez thinks she's found an approach. Instead of trying to convince them to preserve existence, we'd redirect their ending instincts toward ending suffering, ending conflict, ending injustice. They could become the galaxy's most effective problem solvers, beings whose nature drives them to identify what needs to end and end it precisely, without collateral damage. Zethkalar considered this. Turn universe enders into precision problem enders. Exactly. It's theoretical at this point, but the Void Callers have agreed to a small-scale pilot program. A chime announced an incoming priority communication. The holographic display shifted to show Admiral Kithara aboard the Imperial flagship Eternal Flame. "Your Majesty, urgent report from the Outer Rim. The conquest fleet of the Burning Crown has been spotted moving toward the neutral zone. Intelligence suggests they're planning to test our transformation capabilities through direct assault." Zethkalar's expression darkened. The Burning Crown Empire was one of the few remaining purely military civilizations, built entirely on conquest and domination. They viewed the transformation movement as weakness that invited attack. Ito. Positions. Second and Fourth Fleets are in position to intercept. However, preliminary scans suggest the conquest fleet includes several transformed species fighting for the Burning Crown, beings who were supposedly successfully integrated into cooperative societies. This was troubling news. If transformation could be reversed through military conditioning, it called into question the permanence of their achievements. Recommendations? Standard response would be immediate military engagement. However, Kithara paused, looking uncomfortable with what she was about to suggest. Lyra's transformation protocols might be applicable even to active military forces. You want to try transforming an attacking fleet? The theory is sound, Lyra interjected before Kithara could respond. Military aggression is ultimately another form of predatory behavior. If we could demonstrate transformation in real time, during actual combat conditions, it would prove the concept's universal applicability. It would also risk the lives of millions if the transformation fails during battle. But if it succeeds, it ends not just this conflict but the concept of military conquest as a viable galactic strategy. Zethkalar was quiet for several minutes, weighing options that could determine the future of galactic civilization. Below them, the Institute continued its work, former enemies learning to cooperate, former predators protecting former prey, former parasites healing former hosts. Admiral Kithara, maintain defensive positions but do not engage. Lyra, you have 72 hours to develop battlefield transformation protocols. Your Majesty, 72 hours isn't enough time to. Then we'll use whatever protocols you can develop in that time. His voice carried absolute determination. Either transformation works under the worst possible conditions, or it doesn't work at all. Time to find out which. As alarms began sounding throughout the station, calling transformation specialists to emergency planning sessions, Lyra felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders. In 72 hours, she would either prove that transformation could end warfare itself, or she would watch everything they had built fall to the oldest and most brutal form of conflict resolution. But as she looked around the central hub at dozens of species working together, species that had been enemies just years before, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. After all, they had turned predators into protectors, parasites into healers, and an emperor's rage into galactic transformation. Surely they could find a way to turn conquerors into builders. The galaxy was about to find out if humanity's greatest strength, the ability to see potential for change in the most unlikely places, could transform even the concept of war itself. And in a small chamber deep within the station, former pack leader Siktar was already assembling his best guardians for what might be the most important protection mission in galactic history. Protecting the transformation specialists who were about to attempt the impossible once again. Some things, after all, never changed. Protectors protected, healers healed, humans hoped, and emperors who loved their people found ways to make the impossible happen. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what transformation could accomplish when EV